Rashmi, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here. I know that Microsoft is obviously a leader in the AI space and the data space. One of the exciting things is kind of your expanded role at Microsoft, now leading emerging technology, AI, and data, and just wanted to have you talk about why these three things are coming together at Microsoft.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Nate. So yes, I've recently taken on the role of the lead for business development for AI, data, and emerging technologies. And it makes sense in some ways. I've had AI and emerging technologies, which has been mixed reality, AR, VR, everything autonomous in terms of autonomous systems, transport, metaverse, silicon, and Web3. And of course, with all of those, you can see an underpinning of data and how data becomes so important today. So putting it together with data is absolutely makes sense in my mind.
Absolutely. We're grateful for the support around data, AI, and blockchain. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is really how all these things play together. I think Microsoft is a leader in the market around AI, and just wanted to really jump in around Microsoft's AI strategy, and really talk about like how has the age of AI changed Microsoft's current and future strategy of where you're going?
Yeah. So, look, I think everybody's fully aware that we're at a moment in history where generative AI has really upended a lot of our expectations that we had before. Just as a few years ago, enterprises were really focused on that digital transformation to make sure that their people, processes, outcomes, product were all geared up for the moment that was coming for them to take effect of that digital transformation. Now we're at another point of inflection where really the added productivity, efficiency, customer experience gains, or the reduction in terms of costs and efficiencies, all driven by potential for AI today. So we definitely see that as a point of inflection. And so being able to have that accessibility to the best models and the best services that are imbued with all of that AI has really become a priority for us in terms of how we give accessibility to everybody, irrespective of what sort of role they're in these institutions. And really firmly believing that every industry will be impacted at this point as well. So making it accessible, not just through all of our sort of first-party products in terms of the ones that probably most people are using day to day, but also those enterprise products through cloud, through our developer tools, and through what they see in the infrastructure as well.
You turn on the news today, you hear about AI all the time. Obviously, we're big into Web3 and blockchain. I think a lot of people like to segregate, like, oh, there's a blockchain wave and there's an AI wave, and there's a lot of discussions around intersections of that. But how do you really think like blockchains can complement AI? How do you think they interact together? Like, how are you building the strategy from a business perspective and use cases at Microsoft to support this? Yeah,
so several ways, I guess. I mean, I guess we've been very active in this space for a while in terms of, really contributing to some of the open source projects, really making sure that we're part of those communities in that space as well. And then making sure that our cloud is really a conducive place for startups that are working in this space to really be able to grow and thrive on it. And if we look at the sort of promise of, the sort of Web3 environment of, say, openness and connectivity of apps as well, then it starts becoming almost imperative that that interconnectedness, the automation on the infrastructure side is there as well. And so really making sure that that is a grounded foundation for those that are developing in that space. And then when I look at enterprises, they're looking at how can I make sure that I'm getting the most out of my data, whether it's data that's been embedded in Web 2 applications, and they might be dipping their toes in the Web 3 environment, or whether they're fully fledged going into an environment where they're saying, well, I've got a process and I need to enhance that process today. And, you know, the sort of use cases that come to mind are certainly in the sort of financial services space where, you know, if I take an example of internal use cases that are just being used for, say, auditing or you know, highly regulated markets where it's really imperative that every step is, I guess, transparent. Then we start looking at, well, how is AI actually used in this space? And so whilst it certainly makes sense from the sort of validity of the data all the way to, you know, how that data is queried, within the AI pipeline and how they scale that, it starts becoming imperative that they have, you know, some sort of validation, verification, attestation, and governance imbued into that process as well. So then they start looking at Web3 capabilities to say, well, maybe I can enhance that AI pipeline with Web3 technologies that will actually allow me to say, well, what were the steps in this pipeline? Which departments and organizations are using this particular model, and are they applying the right lenses, say, in terms of the bias filters, in terms of, you know, which vector search databases they're using, which other sources of data they're using specifically for their work, as opposed to everybody for a full organization view as well.
Yeah, and we love working with Microsoft because I think a lot of times when you think about Microsoft in general, I think maybe a perception that is misplaced in the market is that it's very closed loop, right? Like decentralization around Web3 is extremely important. And when you talk about verifiability and transparency, it would be easy for someone to draw a conclusion that, like, well, maybe it needs to be done in a unique, like, startup Web3 open source community. What would you say to how you're building a more open source community and collaboration and connectivity around transparency?
Okay, so I see two questions there. Okay, so one in terms of transparency and accountability. I think, you know, we came into this quite early on. In 2018, we actually published our framework for responsible AI. So being able to make sure that there's that it's fair, without bias, that it's secure with privacy, making sure that it's systemly developed such that it's grounded in the system from the minute it's made, and also inclusive, so it's actually accessible to all. And all on the foundation principles of transparency and accountability. Those that build it should be accountable for it as well. And so we've been there for a while in terms of, you know, really making sure that we're true to those, whether it's through the red teaming sort of activities we do to make sure that an AI model is ready for you know, whole-scale use, or whether it's through you know, our own models that we build or others as well. And so that's been around for a little while and certainly been our North Star in terms of responsible AI. The second question I think you asked was the sort of community and, you know, how we're seeing that, especially around Web3.
Decentralization, yeah.
I guess, as I said, you know, we've been participating in open source projects for a long time. And I think GitHub and, you know, what we do on Visual Studio Code really are communities of people, and especially as we go into the Web3 environment, very important actually as well, right? They grow into more and more importance, and making sure that the accessibility side of the responsible AI is embedded in there for Web3 as well suddenly takes on a life of itself. And so when we look at the application of AI, say, for example, GitHub Copilot, that actually allows people to be able to code in different, you know, even those that don't code, to be able to enter that environment. You know, if I take an example of, you know, being able to build smart contracts, but in different abstraction languages, GitHub Copilot will allow you that ease to get to that point, even if you're not a seasoned programmer or developer in that space as well. So that accessibility is also really important to us. And then the other place, I guess, community thrives is diversity, right? If I look in this room, there's some diversity, but I think we need more. And so making that accessible and opening it up is really a driving North Star in this space as well. And then I think you had a third question there on decentralization, didn't you?
Please.
I'll let you come back to that.
Absolutely. And just from a space and time perspective, we're thrilled how much effort and attention the community within Microsoft really puts into safety and transparency and working through how do we think about verifiability. You're really pushing us to think about how do we bring unique verifiability and capabilities within space and time to a broader market around SQL, around database capabilities. And as we think about reshaping industries, a lot of times, people think that we're building technology and looking for a use case, but how do you think overall the verifiability and transparency and AI and blockchain technology is going to, how are you seeing it, I guess, start to transpire in industries, and how do you think it's going to reshape industries?
Yeah, so I think 2 or 3 aspects of that. One, certainly, you touched on the decentralized view of data, how that's stored, how that's actually accessed, how that's actually shared as well, and who has control over sharing that. So I think that's probably a driving force in terms of, just acceptance of, an adoptability of some of these models as well. I think the other is also, user-controlled sort of identities as well. When I look at our Entra service as well, where we're seeing a decentralized view of how people are actually having verifiable, attestable identity view as well across the whole pipeline in terms of how, people who are part of a particular workflow are actually showing up in that workflow as well. And then, the other part of decentralization, I guess, driven from the AI perspective is a sort of horses for courses, right? We certainly look at models that are in the cloud, but actually there are other models as well, all the way to on-premise models as well. So how people use that, how they deploy these models, will also drive some of those decisions around decentralization too, as to where that data is stored and what they actually want to be able to share as well.
And I'd be remiss not to dive into data, obviously, because we focus so much on data. But when you think about LLMs and when you think about blockchain and you think about capabilities that are required from a data foundation to verify data, it's complex, it's hard. Obviously, there's view of how did this come together and how do you think about building that overall infrastructure? How do you think about that?
In terms of LLMs and infrastructure?
In terms of why data is important when it comes to developing LLMs and tools and how you think about building the infrastructure around.
Yeah, so when I look at how enterprises want to use intelligent tools today, they're looking at a bunch of data that's been collected in disparate silos sometimes, environments that are distributed across their organization, different age of capabilities as well, all the way from transactional databases all the way to the more advanced features today as well. And then really looking at that and saying, well, how do I bring that intelligence, those insights out and really exploit the value of this data across my organization? And that's when they really look at, well, how do I get a single view, a unified view, not just in terms of governance and privacy, but also in terms of how I'm using that compute, but also how I'm actually accessing those insights, and then the intelligence on top of it as well. So we've certainly looked at how we can bring those together in a single uniformed perspective for those enterprises. And my future view is that, and even now as people start dipping their toes into Web3 environment, they're certainly we're recognizing that the data actually spans Web 2 and Web 3 technologies and capabilities, and they want to be able to go across the existing data on and off chain seamlessly, to be able to validate, to be able to verify, to be able to attest in terms of their queries, in terms of where their models came from, what filters people are applying to that. And so really bringing the two together in that environment requires that unified data view as well.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times when you think about data and databases, you think of, in a sense, a zero-sum game sometimes. And we definitely aren't seeing that in the market with Microsoft as we think about going to market. One of the things that's really exciting for us is when you're looking at enterprises, they have these to your point, they have these data platforms and these databases, and they have a lot of value. There's a lot of data gravity within these databases, and they want blockchain technology. They want to be able to interact with blockchain technology, but with familiar tools.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons we're thrilled to be working on how do we put and enable proof of SQL to verify queries across blockchains and LLMs and identify more data use cases with Microsoft. So that's
Absolutely.
somewhere where we're excited about.
So tell me, Nate, where are you applying AI today, and how's that working out for you?
Yeah, so there's 3 areas that we're really focusing on AI today. The first one is a chatbot, right? If you want to come into space and time with the help of Microsoft and with ChainML, we've put this chatbot within our application, our studio. So you can come in, ask a natural language question and say, show me all wallets with a balance, for example, greater than 10 link and have purchased an NFT in the last 2 days. And so you can start to get real-time insights without knowing SQL. The next thing was, is that SQL accurate and how developed is that SQL? And we just, the Microsoft AI Co-Innovation Lab just did a huge report on the value of co-collaboration in AI. And we saw a 40% increase of the accuracy of the SQL that was generated with what we had built versus what we were able to develop in the AI lab. So we're grateful for that support. And then, I think, how do we look at in the future around like verifying not just data that we're sending to a smart contract, but how do you verify data in general when you think about more robust LLMs that are being developed, and how do we think about, to your point, the attestation as kind of the next frontier for us around origin, source, storage.
Very interesting. And, thank you for reminding me about the labs as well. For all startups, they're open to people both in location and remotely as well. Thanks to the pandemic, we've moved to different models, but they're in 6 locations in the world, from Asia, Europe, and in the US as well. And they're open to all startups and large enterprises who want to reduce their time to market with people who can use Microsoft services and help to build with, so that you come in with your teams, you rapidly build over sprints, and then you leave with all your data and all your stuff as well.
Absolutely. I know time's short, so maybe I'll wrap up with one question, which is, what's the most interesting use case maybe that you're seeing between Web3, blockchain, and AI?
I think I have to come back to the fact that, the openness, immutability, and the fact that we can really apply, those validation and verification capabilities to things like audit trails really, I think, makes a game changer for how we start really having the adaptability and adoptability of AI into some of these critical markets as well.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, we're fully aligned to verifiability of computation, of data, of feeding various types of models within the data marketplace and where the databases are starting to develop some unique verifiability. So we're going to continue to push that from our aspect as well. But we're just grateful for the time, and thank you for coming out and spending time in Barcelona, and appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Nate.
Thanks.